The Giants have signed Cuban slugger Jorge Soler to a 3-year, $42 million contract. Immediately adds a ton of power to this lineup. He had 36 homers last year. Pure DH, kind of shakes up the roster a little bit. What are the ramifications? Who is Jorge Soler? What does he bring to the team? Next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, coming up on 5 years hosting Locked On Giants, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever it is that you get your podcast, including YouTube. So check us out there if you have not already, and please hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you're following the show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. More on that later. But obviously, the news of the hour, the news of the 2 a.m. hour, in my case, is that the Giants signed Jorge Soler. Susan Slusser was the first to report it, reporting that they agreed to a 3-year deal with Soler and that it was pending a physical. That's obviously the scariest words that Giants fans can hear. Every deal, though, is pending a physical, so it's not unusual, but we just had, nightmare scenario last season with Correa last offseason. But Jorge Soler, we literally just did an episode last night talking about how he wanted a 3-year deal reportedly, but other teams were, including the Giants, were balking at that third year. Well, he gets it. He gets that third year. He turns 32 on February 25th, so he'll play all of this, his first year at 32, and then second year at 33, third year at 34. But this is a guy who just adds a ton of power. When I think of Jorge Soler, the first thing I think is power, and the Giants have not had a hitter hit 30 home runs in a season since 2004, Barry Bonds. So we're talking literally 20 years. This will be the 21st season, because if you count 2004 and 2024, 21 seasons. They may finally break the streak. He had 36 homers last year. He led, I believe, all of baseball, certainly the American League, in homers in 2019 with 48. And over his since that season in 2019, he's averaged 30 home runs per 530 something plate appearances. So basically, if the man plays, he hits 30 homers. And you might think, oh, what about the ballpark? Well, we have on Baseball Savant, using kind of StatCast data, the expected home runs by park. And it says, note, this tells how many of the players' home runs would have been out of other stadiums. This accounts for different wall heights, distances, and environmental effects. You know how before the game they show the wind patterns and all that? This is accounting for that. So it's kind of an incredible thing. And it says something about the Blue Jays in the COVID year when they didn't play in Toronto, blah, blah, blah. But it says last year, Soler obviously hit 36 homers. And if all of his games were played at Oracle Park, he would have hit 32. So we're not talking a huge drop off there. And then the season in which he hit 48 homers, in reality, if he played all of his games at Oracle Park, he would have hit 42. So again, that's not a huge decline. And actually, if we look at 2021, he hit 30 homers. And it says if he played all his games at Oracle Park, he would have hit 36. So I think a lot of that is that he just hits the ball hard, all in the air, all over the field. and a lot of balls to center included. And Oracle Park has that shallow center field now once they added the bullpens. 391 feet to dead center, I think, is the shortest dead center in baseball. And so if you look at his, baseball savant page, 83rd percentile in walk rate last year. What I love to see, 93rd percentile in expected weighted on base average. So that's very much a mouthful, but it's a weighted on base average is a really relevant. It's like the most robust and kind of complete offensive statistic. It's not park adjusted, but being 93rd percentile in the most complete and robust offensive metric is quite good. And his barrel rate was 91st percentile at 15%. So basically, the man can hit. There is some swing and miss. There is some strikeout tendencies, but he can hit. He cannot really defend. If we look at his career kind of defensive numbers, they're not good. And we've kind of done this exercise before as we have heard the Giants linked to Soler. And so I'm trying to find defensive runs saved in his career in the outfield, minus 55. Minus 55 defensive runs saved in 4,000 innings-ish, 4,017 innings. And outs above average, they didn't start measuring this until 2016, minus 24 outs above average. And then ultimate zone rating, and the number spits out negative 23, and that's runs above average. So, and he's never played center. This is only in the corners. So he's a DH. And the reason I've been mailbags earlier in the offseason, we got questions about the feasibility of the Giants signing Jorge Soler. And I initially kind of wrote it off because I didn't think that they would go out there and sign a dedicated DH, like just somebody who just kind of fills that DH spot and doesn't really see time in the outfield. You might be thinking Jock Peterson, but I would also add Jock Peterson is very different because he does not face left-handed pitching ideally. Whereas with Jorge Soler, we will pull up the platoon splits, but he's not a guy that would be platooned. And that is reflected in this contract. So it's not just that, Gabe Kapler's gone, and so therefore they're not going to platoon him. It's more like Jock Peterson, if you look at the numbers, has historically been terrible against left-handed pitching and really good against right-handed pitching. And so you platoon him. And that was reflected in his contract. The initial one he took from the Giants, 1 year, $6 million, and then the one he just got from the D-backs, another 1 year deal, I believe. And so anyway, we'll get to Jorge Soler's platoon splits and then the ramifications that this signing has on the rest of the roster. A lot of people online, as I'm reading, talking about how this would seem to indicate that they may need to move a J.D. Davis or a Michael Conforto. Do I agree with that assessment? We'll kind of break down how the Soler signing affects the rest of the roster momentarily. And before we do, though, today's episode is brought to you by our good friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. I personally have used them for style on my vehicles and I've literally been happy with the results 100% of the time. With over 122 million parts to choose from for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Alrighty, as promised, I want to get into the platoon splits. Also, I do want to discuss the personality, not just the numbers, but the person, Jorge Soler, and what he brings to the San Francisco Giants. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day, everydayers. Tomorrow, more on this signing. Tomorrow is the day when teams can add players to the 60-day injured list, clearing up a 40-man roster spot. And so I'm not surprised by the timing of this reported agreement. It could be they had an agreement last week and they just kind of waited until now to kind of finalize it, I guess you could say. But anyway, we'll get to mailbag questions, more on this, and maybe more moves to come. We'll see those 60-day moves and all that. So anyway, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now you can also find it on Amazon Fire TV. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find the Locked On Sports Today channel now on Amazon Fire TV. All right, so more on Jorge Soler. I want to get into the platoon splits because I always feel like this is a situation or like an aspect of the game that I don't want to say is not fully understood, but people have a problem with the Giants platooning. It's not that they just choose to platoon everybody. It's that they platoon players who ought to be platooned. And so that's more of like a decision to sign certain players type of thing than a managerial type decision. It's a personnel decision rather than a managerial decision. So Soler, not a platoon player. You're not giving out 3 years, $42 million and platooning a guy. That's just not how it works. So in his career, he's only been a little better than average against right-handed pitching. But still, if you look at Jock Peterson, he's been 40% below average against left-handed pitching as a left-handed hitter. So Soler against same-handed pitching is still producing at an above average level, and his power is still there. 210 isolated power, significantly better than average. What we're going to see here is that his on-base percentage against right-handed pitching in his career is .323, and the isolated power 210. So let's remember those numbers and then look at left-handed pitching in his career. The on-base percentage jumps from whatever 323 to 348, and the isolated power jumps to 269. So he's just a monster against left-handed pitching. And I really want to look at kind of more recently, if we go from 2019 against left-handed pitching, he's got a isolated power of 307. I would venture to guess that that's one of the top 5 in baseball. Right-handed hitters versus left-handed pitching since 2019. 307 isolated power is crazy. He's 557 plate appearances, 41 homers. That's not a full season's worth of at-bats. And he's got 41 homers against lefties in 500. That's crazy. That's crazy talk. With a 348 on base percentage. So since 2019 against right-handed pitching, he's got a 110 weighted runs created plus, 326 on base, 230 isolated power. So he's not as good against same-handed pitching, but he's also still above average. And so what you have here is an above average bat, no matter kind of who's on the mound. And if it's a lefty on the mound, look out, because he is one of the most dangerous power threats in the game. This guy, check out his Instagram. If you're on Instagram, look up Jorge Soler and look at some of the workouts that he's been up to, and you'll see what I'm talking about. The man is ripped, and he brings a lot of flair. And this is a team that has been kind of dull to watch in the last couple of seasons. And even I got some complaints from people, or people kind of pointing out that even in 2021, when they won 107 games, there was just something about the team that was, I mean, Gabe Kapler's kind of mantra. He was always talking about not getting too high or too low. Whereas you watch these other teams like the Marlins last year with Jorge Soler on the team, they get high all the time. High meaning, they get excited and they have flair and they do bat flips and they wear funny hats and chains and stuff when they hit homers in the dugout. And they do little dances and whatever. And Jorge Soler has been a huge part of that, like kind of a leader in that way. And so, he's Cuban. They don't have any other Cuban players on their roster, but I just think he's going to bring an element of kind of pizzazz that the team has been lacking. And I hope that they're not done. And we're going to get into, like I said, what this means for the rest of the roster, but also where do they stand now payroll wise? Where do they stand in relation to the luxury tax? But Jung-Hoo Lee is a character. I don't know how well it meshes and translates, Korean to Cuban. Like you're going to have to, something might be lost in translation there, but you've got two guys that you've brought in on a 3-year deal for Soler, a 6-year deal for Jung-Hoo Lee with an opt-out after 4. So, by the way, 5 players the Giants have brought in on 3+ year deals, including the trade for Robbie Ray. Robbie Ray does have an opt-out after this season, but it's kind of a no-brainer. It was kind of a no-brainer move, and even if he opts out, the downside is simply that you don't owe Mitch Haniger $15.5 million next year. And you lose if he opts out. It means he pitched well, but it's not like they were the original signing team, and so I don't really consider it a problem. And you got off the hook for Mitch Haniger, who was really bad. So anyway, I think it's not quite enough. I think they need to do more, but the offense for sure, as long as this guy's healthy, got a lot better. And he's not going to be platoon. He's just going to be in the middle of the lineup, DHing, maybe like in an emergency playing in the outfield. Certainly he's capable. He's played 4,000 plus innings in the outfield in his major league career, but would seem to me that he's a pure DH here. And that's where the rest of the roster ramifications come in, because we've discussed, like, if you sign a Matt Chapman to play third base, what happens to JD Davis? And you might say, well, move him to first base, have him platoon with Lamont Wade. But then what happens to Wilmer Flores? You might say, put him at DH. And then I would say, Jorge Soler is there. And so does it take them out on Matt Chapman? Are they now committed to JD Davis? Or do you still go out and get a Matt Chapman? And then is JD Davis a trade piece to get something else that you need more? So all of these are questions. And then there was also a Andrew Baggarly kind of, I can't tell if it was a report or if it was kind of just a guess, but he talked about the Giants wanting to go into the season with a pretty stable outfield that was like Luis Matos in left field. And that was kind of a shocker in a way, not because I don't think he should play left. I think that he didn't do a great job in center, and so I do think he probably should play left, at least for now. And they got Jung-Hoo Lee, and so he's going to be their center fielder. But I just don't see them handing an everyday role to Matos, and I do see room for Conforto. Whereas Baggarly kind of suggested that it was going to be Matos in left and Conforto at DH, at least in a platoon. And I don't know who, I guess Wilmer Flores. None of that doesn't really make sense unless you add other players. And so I'm going to get into that, kind of the ramifications, kind of fully explain what I'm talking about and where they are payroll wise now, adding $14 million a year, and where are they in relation to the luxury tax? How much money is left up until you reach that first luxury tax threshold, and all of that momentarily. And before we get into it, I want you to know that today's episode is brought to you by none other than America's #1 sports book, and that is FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel. America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. I'm just right now checking out the odds to make the playoffs in the Western Conference and the Golden State Warriors at plus 124. That's the odds that I'm looking at today. That is sixth highest as far as I can tell, at least in terms of what's being offered here. Plus 124 to make the playoffs. So you can check that out and so much more, like clutch player of the year, Steph Curry is the leading candidate, etc. So just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. Again, FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, as promised, we are going to just kind of continue to map out how does the signing of Jorge Soler impact the Giants roster. There's been a lot of suggestion that it like means another move is to follow. I don't quite see that. I'm not saying that another move is not to follow, but I don't see it as a necessity. I think that they could roll into the year with this exact configuration of position players that I'm about to lay out. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers tomorrow. We've got a lot of mailbag questions left over, but if there's any more news, putting guys on the 60-day IL, perhaps signing additional players, perhaps a past physical by Jorge Soler, all of that will be on top of it no matter what is the most pertinent topics for the show. But in case nothing happens, which most of the offseason that has been the case, we do have a lot of really intriguing mailbag questions that we'll get to. So anyway, I kind of mapped this out and discovered a 13-person offensive unit that I think makes sense for the San Francisco Giants. And that like you could lay out I don't want to say a lineup, like your roster, 13, your roster is 26 players, and I've found 13 position players, and they all make sense. And so I don't see the necessity to make a move on the position player side, but it doesn't hurt to upgrade. But some people are acting like this means you have to trade Conforto, you have to trade JD Davis. I don't see that. In fact, if you trade JD Davis, you don't have a third baseman. Like, who's your third baseman? And so I don't understand that at all, actually. So I've got my 13 players: Jung-Hoo Lee in center, Thairo Estrada second base, Lamont Wade in a platoon at first base, Jorge Soler DH, Michael Conforto platoon in left field with Luis Matos is how I see that. Wilmer Flores as platoon at first base with Lamont Wade. Mike Yastrzemski platoon in right field with Austin Slater. Patrick Bailey, everyday catcher. Right now, Marco Luciano is kind of penciled in as that starting shortstop. No platoon there. Tom Murphy, backup catcher. We're at 10 right now. And then you've got JD Davis as your starting third baseman. And that's 11. And then Austin Slater is 12. And then Luis Matos would be 13. So who on that list is, I don't want to say expendable, but you'd have to replace them. So it's a complete group, but I'm not saying it's a perfect group that you should go into the season with. Now, where are the areas for improvement? I mean, if you sign Matt Chapman, I do think that is an upgrade over JD Davis. And if you were to sign Chapman, then that does make JD Davis expendable, because otherwise he doesn't really have a spot. He's Flores is already platooning at first in this scenario. Soler is taking up the DH at bats. Davis is not versatile enough to be kind of a valuable bench piece. And so maybe this just means you're not signing a Matt Chapman. And maybe the move instead is have is to bring in a shortstop and have Marco Luciano competing at third with JD Davis, with Casey Schmidt. Just make it a competition and have guys earn it. And that's kind of depth, right? Guys get hurt. And then say JD Davis wins that role and you send Luciano down or something, maybe you trade for a Willy Adames and then third base becomes a competition. Willy Adames only on, a 1-year deal and then he reaches free agency. But and then Luciano competes for third and say JD Davis gets hurt. Then you've got a Schmidt and a Luciano to kind of be that depth. And then that becomes really good depth. And also at shortstop, if Willy Adames got hurt, you've got the depth of a Marco Luciano. And so there's definitely room for improvement. And in that scenario, I'm not sure that I even have like a backup middle infielder at all. I don't. I've got 2 backup outfielders and Wilmer Flores on my bench if there's a right-handed pitcher, plus a backup catcher. And so I think there is a case to be made that you need another player capable of playing shortstop that's on the bench instead of who? I don't know. So that's maybe where you come into like saying, but if you take away JD Davis, you need a third baseman. So it is a little bit complicated. I think it's incomplete. I think that there's still work to be done. And in terms of the finances, so this ups the Giants' payroll to an estimated $168 million, which is about $30 million under where they were last year. And I keep pointing out they were cruising around 160 something for several years, and then they went up to 190 something last year. But they got $30 million handed to them from MLB for the $900 million sale of MLB's remaining stake in BAMTech that they sold to Disney. And so when Greg Johnson talks about breaking even, and you see a trend of spending call it $165 million a year on payroll, and then suddenly 1 year you get $30 million extra and you spend $195 million, it starts to look pretty clear because right now they're at about 165 again. And so if they don't do anything else, then it's just super obvious that that's kind of where they're setting a budgetary limit. Maybe they make an exception for a special kind of player, but if this is it would be in line with the trend of spending, and it would be disappointing because I think that, there's some good free agents out there. Blake Snell would make them a heck of a lot better, I think. They've talked about improving the left side infield defense and haven't done it yet, and so I don't think they're done, but at the same time, they're going to have to push past where they've been payroll-wise, minus that year where they got that extra $30 million. So, luxury tax-wise, according to Roster Resource, they're at about $213 million, which leaves $24 million-ish to go before they hit that first luxury tax threshold. And that's average annual value. That's not total money. So it's not like, oh my gosh, you can't sign even a player for like 3 years, 30 million because you only have 24. It means per year. So you could sign a guy to a 10-year, $230 million contract and come in under the luxury tax because that per year number is 23 and you need to get to 24 to hit that threshold. And so, I threw this out on like Slack in a channel I'm in, but if you say Blake Snell, 24 million a year times 6 years, 144 million, like you could theoretically do 6 years, 144 million for Snell and be like under the luxury tax. And you also have the chance and option and possibility of trading away some guys who are making some money if your goal is to stay under the luxury tax and you still want to sign players. Like you could trade a JD Davis and sign a Matt Chapman, and that would clear money while spending money at the same time. So that could change the calculation. But basically, there's wiggle room still. They're not right up against the luxury tax. There's still $24-ish million to go, even with the addition of Jorge Soler, pending a physical. I'm never going to assume, but man, check out his Instagram. The dude's in good shape. My goodness. That's why he's got so much power. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers. More on Soler, more mailbag questions tomorrow. Pitchers and catchers report tomorrow. I don't even think I mentioned that yet. And also, just want to remind you that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now you can also find it on Amazon Fire TV. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find the Locked On Sports Today channel now on Amazon Fire TV. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out so much. So thank you in advance, and sincere thanks to everyone who's done so already. I can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. I'm hyped on the edition, but I hope that they do more. I think they need to do more. So more on that tomorrow. But thanks again for listening. Today, you are now Locked On Giants.